You ever sat in a room where someone said your name, but not like a compliment, more like a trigger? They didn't yell, they didn't even raise their voice, but something in their tone twisted the knife, and just like that, everyone turned to you. Eyes waiting, the room colder, the air heavier. You weren't being asked a question, you were being measured. It's that moment when your body wants to jump in, defend, correct, explain, say something, anything, because the silence feels unbearable. Because you think if you don't speak, they'll win. But what if I told you that speaking is how you lose? That the urge to explain is exactly what strips your power, that every word you say in defense is another drop of blood in the water. Most people don't understand this. They believe silence is weakness, but silence, true silence, is dominance disguised. And today, you'll see why the most powerful people in any room are the ones who say the least. The moment you're attacked, called out, accused, even gently criticized, your first instinct is to defend. You feel it. That tension in your chest, that rush of heat behind your ears, it's almost automatic. You lean forward. You say, "That's not what I meant," or "You misunderstood," or worse, "Let me explain." And right there is where most people lose themselves, because that moment, it's not about truth, it's about control. And the second you start defending yourself, you hand them the frame. Most people think the world is rational. They think if they just speak clearly enough, they'll be understood, they'll be respected, they'll be seen for who they really are. But life doesn't work like that. Power doesn't wait for your explanation. Respect doesn't come from how much you say. It comes from how little you need to. Think about it. Have you ever explained yourself to someone, only to feel smaller afterwards? You laid it all out, tried to make sense, tried to clear the air, and what did you get? More doubt, more questions, less certainty, because the more you explain, the more uncertain you sound, and uncertainty is weakness in disguise. People don't just hear your words, they read your posture, they watch your eyes, they measure how much space you need. To justify your existence, you may believe you're clarifying, but what they see is someone begging to be understood. And begging is never powerful, even if your words are clean, even if your voice is calm, even if you're right. You see, the frame is everything. If they get to define the frame, they define you. And when you defend yourself, you're stepping into their territory, you're acknowledging their right to question you. And the moment you do that, they no longer need evidence, they just need to sit back and watch you squirm. That's the trap. That's the invisible leash they hand you, and most people take it with the best of intentions. With a heart that just wants to be seen clearly, with a mind that believes in fairness, but the world isn't fair, it's strategic. They don't want clarity, they want leverage. They don't want peace, they want your reaction, because once they have your reaction, they have the power. So the next time someone accuses you, subtly or directly, and your body tightens, and your mind screams, say something, just breathe, pause, let the moment stretch, and remember this. Every word you say from a place of defense is a vote for your own weakness. That's not silence, that's surrender. The real silence, the kind that holds power, comes not from fear, but from knowing. You don't need to explain yourself to people who only want to watch you fall. Ethan didn't sleep that night, not after the meeting. Not after the comment from Miles that landed like a slap in front of everyone. It wasn't what Miles said, really. It was how he said it, smooth, casual, wrapped in humor but sharpened like a dagger. You always have something to prove, don't you, eh? Laughter, side glances, a few people smirking behind their laptops. Ethan didn't laugh, he smiled, tight, defensive. Then he did what most people do, he tried to fix it. He stayed late that evening. Wrote a follow-up email to the team, carefully worded, clarifying, softening, explaining that his earlier comments in the meeting weren't about ego. Just strategy, just contribution. Then he spoke to his manager, not directly about Miles, of course. He brought it up subtly, mentioning collaboration, miscommunication, alignment, hoping, praying that his boss would see through the noise and understand his intent. And finally, he had coffee with Sarah from marketing. Hey, just wanted to make sure what I said didn't come off the wrong way today." She nodded, smiled politely, but her eyes said something else. She'd already moved on, but Ethan hadn't. By the end of the week, Ethan had explained himself 3 different ways, and with each attempt, he felt something shift. Not in his favor. People grew quieter around him, not out of respect, but distance. His words didn't clarify anything. They exposed something worse, that he cared too much about being seen correctly, that he needed approval, that he was playing defense. Meanwhile, Miles, he didn't say a word, he just watched, because that's what happens when you over-explain. You become the only one talking, and in silence, the other person wins. Ethan started to feel smaller in rooms he used to own. His voice felt heavier, more rehearsed. He second-guessed himself before speaking, and every time he opened his mouth, he saw someone in the corner glance sideways, not because of what he was saying, but because of how hard he was trying to stay in control. That's the paradox. The more you try to control how people see you, the more you lose control. And Ethan, he was learning that the hard way, because when power leaves you, it doesn't slam the door. It drifts, it leaks out in size, clarifications, justifications, and by the time you realize it's gone, you're already talking to no one, trying to defend an image that no longer exists. It was a Thursday morning, the weekly strategy meeting. Same room, same faces, same tension humming beneath the surface. Ethan walked in late, not rushed, just deliberate. He didn't apologize. He didn't explain. He sat down quietly, placed his coffee on the table, and waited. Miles was already speaking. Some new initiative, something vague, padded in buzzwords, and then it came again, another jab, sharper this time. He turned to Ethan and said, "But hey, we've all learned to take bold ideas with a grain of salt, haven't we?" A laughter again, lighter this time, but still there. People looked at Ethan, and Ethan did nothing. No smile, no raised brow, no smirk. Just stillness. He didn't flinch, didn't respond, didn't even adjust his posture. He simply looked, briefly, directly, then looked away. As if Miles had spoken into an empty chair, the room shifted, not loud, just a subtle weight redistribution. A few eyes darted away from Miles. Someone cleared their throat, and Miles, he hesitated. For the first time, his confidence cracked, just a little. Ethan didn't follow up after the meeting, didn't send any emails, didn't mention the moment to anyone. He let it float, let it haunt, because silence, when held with presence, is louder than any clever comeback. And Ethan had discovered something. He didn't need to defend. He didn't even need to fight. He just needed to not flinch. That simple. That devastating. For the rest of the week, Miles was quieter, not silent, just off balance, like a man whose punches stopped landing. He was still talking, but now people were watching Ethan, watching how he moved, watching how he didn't move. And Ethan, he wasn't performing. He was reclaiming space, not with words, but with refusal to play the game. Refusal to lower himself, refusal to let someone else define the frame. That was the moment, the real shift, not when Ethan spoke, but when he chose not to, not out of fear, but because silence, in the right hands, is dominance with the volume turned off. Silence isn't just absence, it's presence. And when used with intention, it becomes a weapon more precise than words ever could be. There's a reason it works, not because it makes you mysterious, but because it shifts the frame. In psychology, it's called a frame control. Whoever controls the frame controls the narrative, and whoever controls the narrative controls the room. When you respond, you validate, you enter their story, you accept their premise, you step onto their field. And the moment you do, you're no longer the one in charge, you're reacting, and the room sees it. Even if you speak calmly, even if you speak well, but when you don't respond, when you simply look, breathe, and let the words hang, you signal something far more powerful. You're not controlled by emotion. You're not controlled by social pressure. You're not seeking approval. You are choosing stillness, and that choice, it disorients people, because most humans crave resolution. They can't handle the unknown. They need answers, reactions, confirmation. But when you give them nothing, you create a vacuum. And nature hates a vacuum, so they start to fill it. They assume, they overthink, they doubt themselves. And that's when the power flips. Silence puts pressure on the other person to prove something, to keep talking, to clarify, to justify. And the longer you stay still, the more they feel exposed. We've seen it in boardrooms. We've seen it in negotiations. We've seen it in politics. The person who speaks first often loses the frame. But the one who pauses, who lets silence settle, forces the other to fill it with uncertainty. It's a psychological edge, a presence signal. It says, I don't need this moment to validate me. And in a world full of noise, that kind of stillness feels like thunder. People respect restraint, even if they don't understand it. They feel it. They sense there's something behind your silence. Something calculated, something dangerous, and the best part, they start watching you differently, not because of what you said, but because of what you could have said, but didn't. They replay your silence in their heads, again and again, trying to decode it, trying to figure out what they missed. And that's the power, because silence is not submission. Silence is strategy. It is not retreat. It is precision. And when delivered with presence, it becomes a mirror. One that reflects not your weakness, but their need to fill space. And that is how control changes hands, without you ever saying a word. Miles didn't understand what was happening, not at first. The jokes still came, but they landed softer now. The room didn't laugh like it used to. People glanced at Ethan, then looked away, not because they pitied him, but because they weren't sure where the line was anymore. Ethan had said nothing, no comeback, no cold remarks, just stillness. And that silence, it started to haunt Miles. He'd throw out a jab, and it would just hang there, no reaction, no energy to bounce off, just space. And in that space, Miles began to crack. He started repeating himself, pushing harder, making comments more often, each one more desperate than the last. The shift was subtle, but obvious to anyone watching. He used to be the one in control. Now he looked like a man trying too hard to stay relevant, to stay powerful, to get a rise. And Ethan, he gave him nothing, no replies, no side glances, not even a sigh, because Ethan had learned the rarest skill, to let someone drown in their own noise. That's when the unraveling began. Miles started following up with people after meetings. Did I say too much? Was that out of line? He started justifying himself, clarifying, sound familiar. He was doing exactly what Ethan had done weeks ago, only now the roles had reversed. And the room could feel it. People stopped looking to Miles for direction. They stopped leaning in when he spoke. He became the man who talked too much, while Ethan became the man everyone watched, not for what he said, but for how he didn't respond. That's the beauty of silence. When used right, it doesn't just protect your position, it flips the script. The attacker becomes the anxious one, the loudest voice becomes the weakest, the predator becomes the performer. On a stage that no longer belongs to him, because in silence, people reveal themselves, and when someone expects a fight, but gets nothing, they start swinging at shadows. That's when their image fractures, not because you exposed them, but because they exposed themselves, and all you did was stay still, like a blade untouched, waiting silent and sharp. Then Ethan disappeared, not literally. He still showed up to meetings, still submitted reports, still hit deadlines. But the version of him that used to be everywhere, in every group chat, every hallway conversation, every reply all thread, that version went silent. He stopped offering unsolicited insights. He stopped clarifying things no one asked about. He stopped asking how people took his last presentation. He vanished, emotionally, and that absence, it spoke louder than any speech he could have given. At first, no one noticed. Then, they started wondering, where was the old Ethan? Was something wrong? Did he hear what people had said? Why wasn't he reacting? Even Miles began to feel it. He sent a few messages, nothing direct, little nudges, trying to provoke a response. Interesting take in the meeting, risky but bold. Silence, and not sure your strategy will land, but we'll see. Is still nothing, no anger, no passive-aggressive reply. Just no reply, and that quiet, it wasn't emptiness, it was control, because when you don't react, you deny your enemy the stage. You erase the scene they're trying to create. Miles grew anxious. He started over-explaining to others. Just teasing, you know, we've always joked like that. We're all under pressure. I didn't mean anything, but the more he talked, the more people saw through him, and Ethan, he remained still, focused, detached, not cold, just untouchable. There's a power in being unavailable, in letting people feel your absence without explaining it. You become a ghost in the room. Present but ungraspable, someone they can't provoke because you've made peace with not being seen. That's the moment you stop defending your name and start letting your silence define your presence. Ethan's aura changed, not through performance. Through withdrawal, a quiet exit from the emotional stage everyone else was scrambling to stand on. And as the days passed, Miles looked louder, Ethan looked heavier, not with burden, but with weight. The weight of someone who no longer plays defense, because the moment you disappear and they can't pull you back, they lose the game they were trying to win. When Ethan returned, truly returned, something had changed. He walked into the Monday meeting like nothing had happened, not with arrogance, not with a chip on his shoulder. Just grounded, still, present. He didn't offer pleasantries. He didn't fill the air with small talk. He didn't try to catch up on lost attention. Instead, he listened, watched, let the room speak first. When his turn came, he spoke. Not much, just enough, direct, clear, no fluff, and no hesitation. And the silence after his words, it was thick. Not awkward, heavy, the kind of silence that makes people sit up straighter, the kind that says, this is someone who knows exactly what he's doing. No one interrupted him, not because of fear, but because his presence no longer invited challenge. He wasn't looking for approval, he wasn't looking for reaction, he was just delivering. That's when people started adjusting to him, noticing his tone, choosing their words more carefully, reading his expressions. Because when you stop chasing validation, people begin to offer it without you asking. Even Miles felt it. He spoke less now. When he did, he watched Ethan's reaction, or lack of one, as if searching for approval he once mocked. But Ethan wasn't watching Miles, he was watching the room, the dynamics, the shifting gravity, and he held it all with no visible effort. That's the moment you cross the threshold, from being the one who manages perception to the one who controls atmosphere. Ethan's silence had grown into something more. It had become aura. A field not loud, but undeniable. He didn't correct rumors. He didn't clarify past mistakes. He didn't carry the weight of people's opinions. He let them carry their own, and in doing so, he rose above the noise, not in status, in tone, in self-possession, because real power isn't loud. It's quiet, not because it can't speak, but because it doesn't need to. That's when you know you've won. Not because they agree with you, not because they applaud, but because the room shifts to your rhythm. Without you ever raising your voice, it was subtle at first, the shift from silence to control. Ethan didn't just withhold responses anymore. He started bending the attacks, flipping them back without ever raising his hand. Someone in the room said, "You've become a bit cold lately, Ethan." He didn't defend, he didn't smile, he just said. Interesting how clarity often feels like coldness to people who expect warmth without respect. The room went silent. Another time, a colleague murmured under their breath, "He thinks he's above us now." Ethan didn't react. Later in a discussion, he said plainly, "Sometimes people confuse groundedness with superiority. It's not the same." He didn't argue. He reframed, not in a loud, clever way, but with quiet certainty, enough to make people stop, rethink, recoil. That's what a reversal looks like, not shouting back, not approving anything, just calmly turning their blade into their own reflection. When someone called him arrogant, he didn't say, "I'm not," he said. Strange how confidence unsettles those who have never stood alone. It wasn't about being harsh, it was about being precise. Each phrase, a surgical cut, not to hurt, but to reveal, because when you stop reacting, you start controlling. And when you stop defending, you start defining. That's the moment people stop throwing punches, not because they ran out of opinions, but because they know you'll never flinch, never beg, never bite. Ethan wasn't invincible, he was untouchable. Not because he fought harder, but because he stopped fighting altogether. He made accusations look small. He made slander sound insecure. He turned hostility into weakness. Every time someone tried to expose him, they exposed themselves. Their frustration, their obsession, their need for validation, and Ethan gave them nothing, not silence anymore. Something colder, cool detachment, truth with no apology. That's when people started thinking twice, not about attacking, but about what attacking would make them look like. Because Ethan had built something far stronger than defense. He built narrative dominance, a presence that didn't just absorb attacks, it inverted them, effortlessly, elegantly, and with finality. There came a point when Ethan no longer needed to withhold his words, because people had already stopped testing him. The silence he once used as armor had evolved into something more powerful, presence, a kind of weight in the room. He could speak now, not because he had to, but because it moved the room when he did. His words were no longer responses, they were decisions, each one calculated, clean, like a line drawn in stone. He didn't defend, he didn't clarify. He didn't soften the blow of his tone for the comfort of others, because he had learned. If your truth needs a filter, you're still negotiating your worth. And he wasn't negotiating anymore. The people who once talked over him now paused when he raised his eyes. The ones who whispered behind his back no longer knew what he thought of them. That uncertainty became his shield, and more than that, his leverage, because when people can't read you, they respect the risk of being wrong. He had no interest in being admired, no need to be liked. He had something rarer, control over how much of himself he allowed others to access. That's the final stage, not silence, not detachment, but aura. A quiet gravitational pull that shifts the atmosphere without effort, and it wasn't built in a day. It was built in every moment. He chose not to defend. Every time he let the insult echo into silence. Every time he walked away without a word. Every time he made stillness feel dangerous. People no longer questioned if he was right. They questioned if challenging him was worth the cost. Because power isn't about being feared. It's about being beyond reach, not in status, but in presence. And that presence, it makes people speak less when you enter. It makes your silence feel like a decision. It makes them think twice before using your name casually. Ethan became the one who didn't have to fight, because no one dared start the war. That's when you stop surviving public opinion and start defining it. When your calm is louder than their attacks. When your gaze does what words used to. When you live not in reaction, but in command, and you realize the final paradox. They stop trying to destroy you, not because they agree with you, but because your silence already told them you were never on trial to begin with.